here we are again. Sorry for the long wait, life has been busy for me, but enough of that. A couple videos ago I showed you guys 3 versions of Pete the Medic that were never published, and with that I introduced the new series, What TF2 Could Have Been. In that series I explore unused and unreleased content and theorize how TF2 could have been like had they added it. So for this episode I've decided to talk about the beta content of TF2, or more accurately, the last iteration that the game went through before its release in 2007. In case you didn't know, it was extremely close to the version of TF2 that we received, but also had some elements of TF2's Classic in it at some point, which were eventually removed. Now, before you say anything, don't worry, I'm not gonna talk about the boring things everyone else has mentioned already. If I do, then that's only to theorize how different the game would be with them in it. No, I'm after juicy content, things that most people probably never even heard about and that isn't even really listed anywhere. Think less repair node and more Medic vs Brewmaster, you know? In fact, I have so much content ready to talk about that I decided to split up this video into 2 parts. Yes, that's right. The first part is titled Gameplay, as it concerns itself with all the content that affects the actual gameplay. You know, things that would have directly influenced the way you play TF2. The second part is called Aesthetics, and it's all about the things which would have changed the appearance of the game. No, I'm not talking about Brotherhood of Arms or Invasion here, those will be their own videos. Don't worry, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I'll also try to list the topics in order of how interesting they are, so the things you might know about will come first, and the things you may have never even heard about come last. So, I hope you are just as excited as I am for this video, because now I shall be diving into the beta content of TF2. And I'm gonna take you with me, you hear that? If I'm going down, I'm not going alone, alright? First off, let's start with something simple. For example, did you know that TF2 had grenades in it at some point? Don't turn the video off yet, I'll only touch on it very briefly to get it out of the way. Yes, before TF2 was released, Valve wanted to add grenades, just like in TF Classic, yada yada boring. Here they are. Look at them. Okay, that's enough. I refuse to even really talk about what they did, because you can just look at the wiki for that. What interests me, however, is what they implied. Obviously, the game would have played much differently, but did you ever think about what would have happened after launch? What if Valve decided to add unlockable grenades alongside or instead of unlockable weapons? It's a reasonable consideration because of how much they would affect the gameplay. Imagine if the first Medic update didn't add the Kritzkrieg but rather a Kritz grenade that damage boosted teammates in a circle. It's also possible that the idea got turned into Halloween spells in the end, considering how similar they function. Valve would have likely also added more outlandish grenades, similar to what we can see with magic spells, such as an airstrike like the Meteor Storm. So if you want to know how they would have actually worked, then just play on Hell Tower. You should be able to still do that once this video comes out actually. Or not, because I'm slow. Sorry. Other than that, there's a couple of fan recreations too. Anyway, moving on. We can see from concept art that some of the classes were supposed to have different weapons, the models for which were actually still in the files and can even still be seen on the dispenser. Spy was supposed to get a tranquilizer gun like in TF Classic, where it did barely any damage and only slowed enemies down. If you ask me, the revolver is a much better choice because it actually gives Spy a fighting chance. Scout was supposed to get an SMG as well as the good old Nailgun that we've heard so much about already. The SMG is self-explanatory, but if you want to know how the Nailgun would have worked, there's a cool trick you can do actually. Just enter a map, press the comma key, then 7, and finally 1. There you go. Sounds underwhelming? Welcome to the Nailgun. Oh, and remember this one clip from Lazy Purple's how it feels to play Scout in TF2?
Then show us. Show us how it feels to play Scout.
Hold on, sorry, no. Would have never happened with the Nailgun. Instead, imagine unsatisfying DDDs and finally the enemy slouching over. The wiki also mentions that Medic's syringe would have worked similar to the medkit from TF Classic, namely healing players by hitting them, and that the Medigun replaced it. However, there isn't really any evidence for that. Plus, early concept art shows the syringe together with a Medigun, even Medic holding it. There's another drawing of Medic holding one as well, but this time from the Invasion incarnation of TF2. Invasion incarnation being the title for my next metal album. Furthermore, what does he do in the first trailer for the game where every class shows off their abilities? Well, he doesn't appear. How curious! It's likely that the model for the Medigun wasn't finished yet, so they couldn't show him using it. So I think that Medic was always supposed to use the Medigun and that the syringe just replaced the bone saw. Alright, you can see that I mean Medic because I just spent the past minutes talking about the stupid Medigun instead of talking about juicy beta content, so let's keep going. Also in the first trailer we can see Sniper walking much more slowly as he's holding the sniper rifle. At about the same speed he would have while zoomed in the final game, but here it's even before he zooms in and shoots heavy. It's possible that the original sniper rifle would have worked much more like the one from TF Classic as well. If you wanna know what that would be like, simply equip the Classic, because that's exactly the same as it was back then. But honestly, who in their right mind would seriously consider damaging themselves by using the Classic? I'm sorry if I start laughing, but the image is just so funny to me. So let's just keep going before I have a laughing fit. Say, have you ever wondered why Demo holds his sticky launcher with 2 hands in his world model, but only uses 1 hand in first person? What does he need his other hand for holding his bottle? No, it's actually much simpler. Originally, he was supposed to hold a trigger for his stickies in his left hand, which would have also explained how he can even detonate them. Where have I heard that before?
Yeah, no, now you wait for someone to visit the chest and you kill them. Oh no, there's no Easter egg.
The model for that trigger actually exists, and I really do wish it would make a return. I have no idea why they cut it, but nowadays I think it would be really cool. Just a little bit of extra flair. Alright, before we enter the topic I'm most excited about, here is one last leftover from TF Classic that was supposed to make it into TF2 at some point. You may know that in Team Fortress Classic, some spawn rooms had turrets in them, which would start shooting at the enemy team if they try to get too close, to prevent spawn camping and enemies getting in a spawn room. They were supposed to make it into TF2, but the only models left in the files were taken directly from TFC. There were textures for turrets that would have fit TF2's artstyle much better, but those are the only things that remain. Or are they? Keep in mind that this is Valve, who loves to reuse resources between their projects. Well, in that lovely little Jungle Inferno update, they released this unused prop of a guard tower with a mounted gun. And there it is. There's the spawn room turret. The texture fits it perfectly. There is a texture for another turret model which didn't get released yet, but I am glad that at least one mystery has been solved so far. Now, how would the game be different with them? Well, I assume they were probably just a band-aid solution to a problem with how the maps were designed. If you don't want players to get inside the enemy spawn room, you could just put up invisible walls. And to prevent spawn camping, you could just add multiple exits for the team so they're not forced to go through a single entrance. And that's what pretty much all TF2 maps do nowadays, so I assume they learned from their mistake very early on. Kinda how they implemented capture points to improve on the idea of flags from TF Classic. Oh, am I getting ahead of myself there? Guess we'll find out in a bit. Alright, I know this technically doesn't count because these changes were done pretty much right before release, but when else am I gonna talk about them? Of course, I'm talking about an early version of Dustbowl. Like many things from this video, it too was more similar to its TFC counterpart. We can see the changes in this really old video which came out right before the game was even released. For example, the control point on the first stage of the map was originally next to the barn, much like where it was in TF Classic. The barn itself also had windows and perhaps only one way to enter it. Apparently there was also a second exit in the building on the bottom floor, just like in the original, plus an alcove on the top. I can see the reasons for removing these, because it would have made ambushing the point much more difficult for the attacking team, because they would have to go through a very giant bottleneck. Now, did you also know that originally Dustbowl was likely not attack and defense, but rather CTF, much like in TFC? We can see this from a couple unused text strings in the files, which mention taking the flag to various command points and capturing them. This would explain why the control point was in the same spot as in the original map, as well as why the capture times on Dustbowl are so darn quick. In TF Classic, the blue team only needed one player to take the flag and bring it over to the point, which would end the round instantly. I assume rounds ended too quickly for Valve, so they decided to go for capture points instead. In my experience from TFC, this was a good idea, because all it took was one jumpy boy bunny hopping over to the point to win the match. I'm not done with Dustbowl yet though, because there's one last thing I wanna show. I don't know if this is just a mock-up drawing or an actual map, but what I do know is that I love it. It seems like it has a more realistic look to it, which fits the early mercenary skin and the concept art much more. I suppose they changed the aesthetic later when they also changed the skins. Worth noting is that you perhaps couldn't exit the building through the windows in this version, and at the very least not stand on any balcony. That's really all that can be said about this, except that the level structure is otherwise pretty much identical. Moving on from Dustbowl now, over to the grandfather of them all, TF2's. In early concept art for the map, you can see that they decided on the aesthetics pretty early on, and I'm willing to bet they even use it as a guideline for other maps in the game. There isn't much more to say about it, except that it looks a lot like the final product, except for the bridge. There is even concept art for the interior of the base, which looks much more ominous with dark shadows and bright lights. It also contains much more primitive spy tech and a simpler design in general at some points. I find this drawing of a table with what appears to be a miniature map on it very interesting. I can't tell which map it is, or if it's even supposed to be any map from the game, but I love the idea. I suppose something similar was revisited later for MVM. Other than that, there's also a very early dev version of 2 Fort. As 1/4 on Facepunch pointed out, it looks very similar to its TFC counterpart. You can also see a lot of the architecture from the concept art in the background, just not textured. In my 2 Fort video, I said that I suspected it was one of the very first maps to be added to the game. This seems plausible considering the early teaser and trailer videos for TF2 took place on that map. In fact, you can even see its development process in those 2 videos. For example, the map in the teaser has an unfinished skybox, which was finished in the trailer version. You can also see a bunch of changes that aren't there in the final build, but most of them are pretty minor, so I won't really list them all. The biggest difference is probably the lack of a roof on the bridge. In hindsight, that sounds pretty terrible because it would mean that Scout couldn't jump into the enemy base, and the only way to avoid snipers would be to go through the sewers. And speaking of the sewers, the water was actually a lot higher like in TF Classic, so you would actually have to dive underwater to go through them. It would also explain why the tunnel walls have these water stains on them, even though the water is currently much more shallow. I also find it curious how there seems to be metal bars covering the sewer entrance in this image. I don't know if the bars go all the way down, but I'm sure there was a way to enter the sewers somehow. I actually really like this idea because it sounds like you're really infiltrating a base via a sewer system, but in actuality it's probably really annoying. Gasping for air and not really being able to set up any buildings there would be really tedious after a while. The entrance to the sewers from inside the base was also pretty different because it was more of a spiral staircase like in TF Classic. And from experience, I can tell you that that would have been incredibly annoying because you would have to constantly move your mouse to the side as you're moving up or down the stairs. I assume that the tunnels were in general a lot closer to TFC's tunnels with no extra room for resupply. The room currently doesn't even make sense because if the tunnels got flooded, you know what they're designed for, you couldn't really access the room via the door and all the computers would just break. Another difference are the spawn doors, which there were 2 of like in TF Classic. One was likely for entry and the other for exit. The current system works much better, however. Additionally, considering that the old map had spawn room turrets, it's possible that this version was going to have them at one point or another too. Overall, this 2 Fort is much closer to the original than the current version. Modern 2 Fort still has its issues, but this would have been even worse. There is a fan recreation of this map, but I think it gets a lot of things wrong, such as the sewers. Still, pretty nice. Alright ladies, gentlemen and everyone else, I know that the sweet tone of my voice is nourishment for your soul, but I'm afraid we're nearing the end of the video. Before that happens, however, let's take a small look at the last early map for today. You've probably heard this before because some YouTubers just had to make a video about this, but the Badlands that we've received wasn't the one that Valve was originally working on. Stefan Godet and Isabelle LeMay worked on a version of the map that was actually much closer to its TFC variant. It's a lot less orange and cartoony, which like the Dustbowl image fits the earlier textures and concept art much more. Also, the amount of details would have likely been terrible for PCs at the time, but great nowadays. I would love for someone to attempt something like that in the map again. The most obvious difference you'll notice is how vertical it is. The soldier and demo in me scream, yes! But the everyone else screams, no please, why would you? Because I can see this map being extremely excruciating to navigate as heavy. I actually prefer the aesthetics of this map over the version we got because yes Alex, I give it to you, in this one case orange is not so good. Are you happy now? Now, I think it's highly likely that this version wouldn't have been 5CP or even 3CP, but rather CTF. I say this because the original was also CTF, and there's also another reason. The original models for the map have been available to the public for quite some time. Among those are the rock walls, the wood architecture, some vehicles, a gun wall with early weapons and some from TFC, lots of spy tech items, a target range, and a big ol' laser. By themselves they're neat, but here's the interesting bit. These props are misplaced, so if you spawn them into an empty map without doing anything, they will spawn at their original positions on the map. So if you do that, you get this. And from this, we can estimate what the map layout would have looked like. It's not much, but I don't know about you, to me it looks like the laser is in the exact same position of where the flag room was in the TF Classic version of Badlands. From this, I'm willing to bet that it was originally supposed to be capture the flag as well, with the laser pointing down at the intel. In that case, it would have played much differently to our Badlands. If I could find a comparison, I would say it would have been like Double Cross, which also has a giant bridge and lots of tunnels and verticality. I'm not saying that the idea got turned into Double Cross though, because that map looked a lot different originally, but that's a topic for another video. I'd love to have played on this version though, because, and I know Uncle Dane is gonna get a brain aneurysm from this, but CTF is great and I love it. So why did we not receive this version of the map? Possible reasons are that it was either bad for optimization, like I said, that the design didn't fit what they wanted, or that they simply couldn't finish it in time for launch, so they decided to remake it from scratch later. I suspect it was a mix of all of them. There is also a fan recreation of this map and they did a really solid job on the exterior, but the interior is just guesswork because there's no concept art available for it. Also, they turned the map into 3CP for some reason? In my opinion, they should have just made it into a small CTF map like the original. So as I was editing this video, a couple people released another version of Badlands. And now here I am recording this bit because you people just love making my life harder, don't you? Now this one is even closer to the original map than that other one. Of course, they also took some liberties on the design, but it's also a CTF map like it should be, and while the interior is still mostly guesswork, it's much more like the original layout. Not perfect, but very close. I really prefer this version over that other one, mainly for the fact that it actually is Capture the Flag. And the design looks much more refined and more accurate. I can only recommend it. Okay, now please let me finish this video before someone uploads another beta tool for it as well. Woof. That was a lot of beta content. But what can we learn from all of this and what does it mean for the game? Well, things like the Nailgun and Tranquilizer show that we shouldn't romanticize cut content, even though I do, because there's often a very good reason for why it was cut, even if it seems cool. The same goes for the grenades. TF2's gameplay is much simpler nowadays, but way more refined in my opinion, and I think that's because they cut these features out. The maps were also a lot less balanced, especially 2-Fort. If you thought snipers were a problem now, play the old version. I do prefer the old Badlands over the current one though, especially if it's CTF. If it were released, it might have actually been one of my favorite CTF maps. All in all, I'd love to play this old version of the game even if it sucks. Oh, what's that I hear? Is it the clickety-clack of your keyboards telling me the comments that TF2 Classic is a thing? It's a nice idea, but not what was promised to me. What was promised to me were the beta elements of TF2 plus some concepts of TF Classic. What I got were no beta maps, no grenades, but a deathmatch mode and custom weapons. In my opinion, the project should have only been a server mod that adds the cut weapons, maps and grenades. Who cares if it's imbalanced? That's the whole point, to show what the game could have been like my series he. Alright, that covers it for this video. Before I go, let me quickly thank my patrons, specifically One Truma, Alexis Chavez, Anthony Pimentel, Brad Z Skatesy, Charlie, Frozen Spaghetti, Oleg Endrav, Paulina Davidova, Ren Marty, The Sad Boo, Zachary Leclerc, and as always, Xenomite. Thanks very much for your support, it really means a lot. And you can also support me if you like by donating to my Patreon, following me on Twitter, subscribing to my channel, or just by watching my videos. I appreciate all of it. And if you're interested in these types of videos, then do check out the 3 Lost Meet the Medics, in which I explore the 3 versions of Meet the Medic that we never received. Or this video, which talks about the time that Portal 2 tried to be like TF2. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.